Thanks, Lucia. Good evening, class. My name is Duan Moldrew. I'm with the 7th State Group, and I'll be covering the Focus and Events, Crises, and Symbols section of Chapter 5. This section of our text says that not all problems are self-evident by the indicators, and needs a little push to get government attention. That push could be a focus and event, such as a crisis or a disaster that comes along to call attention to the problem. Our text draws to transportation and health as crises. Kingdom believes that a transportation issue becomes a burning issue when it reaches a crisis proportion. He says, when we speak of crises and disasters, such references apply almost exclusively to transportation and very little to health. Next, Kingdom points out that the more visible the policy domain, the less important are the crises and disasters. He says that health is universal, affecting all of us. News of the latest disease and cure appears prominently in printed and broadcast media, while transportation news is relegated to business pages. Keenan also talks about a difference in structure. He says that an explanation for the difference between health and transportation involves the structure of the two domains. Crises may be more aggregated in transportation than in health. The basic unit in health is a patient-provider exchange. When something goes wrong, it doesn't show up as a major crisis. If there is to be a crisis-style impact, it must occur in a series of minute changes, patient by patient, and eventually build to a problem of major proportions, or the individual cases must be aggregated into a study or statistic that proves to be compelling. But in transportation, something that goes wrong is often already pre-aggregated. An airplane that goes down killing hundreds of people at once rather than killing one patient at a time. One can extend the same logic about aggregation to differences within policy domains, as we will see presently. Within this section, Keenan also talks about the variations on the focusing event. He says that theme variations being personal experiences of policymakers, the impact of powerful symbols, and the emergence of diffusion of a powerful symbol. In regards to personal experiences by policymakers, Keenan says that lobbyists of biomedical research groups know the disease of the day. They know which congressman's mothers died of which disease and which one's wife has which disease, and they play on it. Patterns of attention to the various transportation modes, for another example, are probably affected by policymakers' personal travel. In regard to the impact of powerful symbols, Keenan says a subject is on the minds of important people anyway, and a symbol comes along to focus their attention. And in regards to the emergence and diffusion of a powerful symbol, Keenan says there can be symbols of political events and policy proposals, as well as for problems. The passage of Proposition 13 in California, for example, became symbolic of a perceived restiveness among taxpayers and a shift in public opinion. Politicians had felt something like a taxpayer revolt coming for some time, but Proposition 13 became their shorthand way of referring to it. They would refer in an offhand way to a Proposition 13 mentality, or a Proposition 13 atmosphere, meaning a severe public opinion constraint on government spending, higher taxation, and new expensive programs. Indeed, the symbol diffused very rapidly, probably because it captured the mood rather convincingly, at least as politicians saw it. The next part of this is the reinforcement of a symbol. Keenan says in general, such a symbol acts, much as personal experiences, as reinforcement for something already taking place, and as something that rather powerfully focuses attention, rather than a prime mover in agenda setting. Symbols catch on and have important focusing effects because they capture, in a nutshell, some sort of reality that people already sense in a vaguer, more diffused way. Also in this section, Keenan talks about how focusing events need accompaniment. Keenan says crises, disasters, and symbols, and other focusing events only rarely carry a subject to policy agenda prominence by themselves. They need to be accompanied by something else. We have already made the point first, that they reinforce some pre-existing perception of a problem, focus attention on a problem that was already in the back of people's minds. Keenan says sometimes a disaster or crisis serves as an early warning. He says attention is called to something that can be considered a problem if subsequent consideration really establishes that there was a widespread condition that needs attention. Bridge deterioration is an excellent case in point. In 1967, the Silver Bridge across the Ohio River between Ohio and West Virginia collapsed, killing several dozen people. Such an event can be an isolated fluke, or it can be an indication of a more widespread problem. If it is an isolated incident, then general policy response may be warranted. Keenan says the events can affect problem definition. Awareness of a problem sometimes comes only with the second crisis, not the first, because the second cannot be dismissed as a fluke as the first could. He goes on to say, after the 1973 Arab oil embargo, there was a flurry of interest in energy and some substantial government action as well, such as the Automobile Fleet Economy Standard. Policymakers maintained in 1979 that energy was high on their agendas before 1979, but their actual interview responses indicated otherwise. They simply were not paying very serious attention to the subject from 1976 through 1978. As one said in 1976, energy was an issue 2 years ago, but it is no longer an issue because there are no lines in front of gas stations. The prominence of that issue is tied directly to the length of the lines in front of the gas stations. Then came the gas lines in the spring of 1979. The indicator of attention jumped abruptly. Lastly, Kingdon talks about the aggregation of disasters transportation example. He says the aggregation of disasters have a similar effect. We argued earlier that the greater reference in crisis transportation than in health may be due to the greater aggregation of the disaster. Attention to aviation safety is brought about quite directly by crashes. Yet, there are far more highway deaths, both per passenger mile and in total. He says that there are 50 to 60,000 people killed in transportation each year. But it's not a crisis issue. It's not very visible. Most of it's on the highways and goes on all the time. There's no big catastrophe. Transportation safety will get a lot more attention than it does if there was some kind of big highway disaster. Thank you. That is all from this section. Stephanie will take it from here and talk to you about why problems fade.